Hi and welcome along to our next past conversation. Delighted today to be joined by Ruth Leach, who is the exhibitions manager at the Hunterian based at the University of Glasgow. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pass over to Ruth and she can introduce herself and say a wee bit about herself.
Hi Paul, thanks for having me today. Yeah, as you said, I'm exhibitions manager at the Hunterian. I've been doing that job just nearly a year, and I've kind of worked in museums pretty much from graduating. So definitely somebody who works with history all the time.
Ruth, just to get started in a conversation, we sort of turn the clock back, so to speak, and think about your time at school. Any memories of studying history from that time?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure lots of people have said this. I just really loved studying history at school. I was trying to think when I kind of first remember properly studying it. And actually, I think when I was interested in history might have come from my dad is a massive history buff. So I think I might have got it from him and talking to my gran as well. I think that's when I kind of became interested in the fact that things happened in the past. But yeah, at school, I just loved it. And it sounds a massive cliche, but I did have some really brilliant teachers who I think really sort of imparted their passion for the subject onto me. I'm like a super nosy person and I love people. And I think that's the massive appeal of history for me. And the fact that you're kind of telling stories and the sort of, as I went on to study it, I guess more at university, the kind of detective work that sometimes involves kind of just following things to see where they go. I think that's why I really enjoyed it. And it's funny actually, as I've been thinking about this today, I've been thinking about what I didn't learn at school as well, and what I haven't been taught. And I know that's something that's kind of been sort of being talked about really at the minute, particularly I guess in the UK and things like Black British history. You know, that was certainly my experience. I was never taught anything about that, and I'm really conscious now that I live and work in Scotland of how little Scottish history I know. So that's definitely something that I'm catching up on, I think, from my school days. But yeah, I think it's just people, their stories, the fact that things, the context could be so different, but actually we're all just people, and being really fascinated about how people live their lives in the past.
Now, Ruth, as I've already mentioned, you're the exhibition manager at the Hunterian at the University of Glasgow. Just curious to know what that job actually involves.
Yeah, so my job, obviously exhibitions are a kind of huge part of what museums do, really. They're how we show off our collections and talk to visitors about maybe new things that we've learned about the collections. We might celebrate anniversaries through exhibitions. And I think probably when people think about museums, they think, oh yeah, exhibitions is definitely part of what they do. And so my job really is, it's quite a lot around project management. I'd say my job now is actually the least that I use history in the kind of, I suppose, the subject sense in my current role. And my job is to sort of bring together all of the people who will work on an exhibition, and for us to just make that happen. So exhibitions usually involve working with everybody from across the museum. So obvious things like, you know, your curator will be the person who, it might have been their idea to have the exhibition. And they'll be the specialist with all the kind of subject knowledge, and they'll know what objects we've got that can tell those stories. But then working with people like our collections management team, who are really all about preparing objects for exhibitions, the work that kind of goes on behind the scenes that maybe is less obvious when people come to visit museums, thinking about how we display objects. Having things neatly tucked away in storage is a lot safer and a lot better for objects than it is to kind of have them on display. So we have to think about that really carefully. We have a designer who thinks about how an exhibition will look and feel, and you know, you might read information in that exhibition and that's how you'll pick up something, but also what it looks like, and even down to like the colour that the walls are painted is part of the message, maybe if you're not necessarily even picking up on that. And then yeah, obviously our teams who look after kind of learning, so if we might have school groups to an exhibition, or particularly because we're part of the university working with students as well. And then front of house for when visitors are, obviously, you know, we're doing this so that people come and want to spend their spare time doing something in the museum. So I kind of work across all of those different roles and bring those people together to take something from kind of an idea about a story or a set of objects to a kind of physical, living, breathing thing that people, come to on a kind of rainy Saturday when they want something to do. And I think some of that, like I say, I use some of the kind of historical knowledge that I have the least almost in that role, but I think some of the skills that I've picked up from studying history are really closely aligned to project management. So I think especially being able to see like a big picture is super important. So everybody else can kind of work on their individual part of the exhibition, but it's my job to kind of keep everything on track. I also do way more spreadsheets than I ever thought I might do. I thought I was somebody who thought that after I'd finished GCSE maths, that was me done with maths, but unfortunately not. It still lives on in my life. But yeah, and I think kind of the way in history that when you're studying history, particularly, that you're kind of taking in lots of information and digesting it and really getting to the kind of kernel of what something's trying to tell you, or certainly what story you can tell around it. That's definitely something in exhibitions that we're always looking at, because visiting an exhibition is different to choosing to read a book about a subject or watching a TV programme about it. You know, it starts with the objects really, so that is the particular skill, I guess, in putting together an exhibition.
Now, Ruth, this is the question I must admit that I've been most looking forward to asking you. You're someone who works with what I would say is an incredible range of history, something, you know, so incredibly diverse. But I wonder if, you know, personally, are there any aspects of history or time periods or events that, you know, just stand out for you and perhaps interest you a bit more than others?
So I mean, like I say, I think across the different museums I've worked in, it's been such a huge range of collections. So when I started working at the Railway Museum, knew nothing about railways. Now I work with an amazing collection at the Hunterian. I think, like as a student of history, so particularly when I was at university, I did an undergraduate degree and then went on to do a master's, and my master's was early modern history. And I particularly looked at for my dissertation, I looked at legal records, court records from a court in Lyon in France in the 17th century, which is kind of makes it even weirder that I then went on to work at the Railway Museum, I think. But I think what I really loved about that was because it was about people, and people who kind of the only time they're appearing in the historical record is through these kind of court records. And the French system, you get really detailed transcriptions of what's said in court. So it's that opportunity, I guess, for those people to speak for themselves a little bit and to find out about their lives. And also, it's the bits of life that are a bit messy. So it was a lot about kind of relationships and emotions and that kind of thing. And I think, again, I'm just really interested in people. So that really stuck out for me. Working with objects and collections. So people quite often ask like, oh, what's your favorite object? And it changes basically every day because we have so many amazing objects. I think generally speaking, I'm particularly interested in archaeological collections, probably for the people thing again, and that sort of detective work. You know, there's a lot, I think, and I know nothing about archaeology, but there's a lot of trying to work out how people lived and what their lives were like from what's left behind. So I think I find that really fascinating. And particularly, I think seeing really ordinary objects and trying to imagine people using them, but also where people have decorate, you know, something that they've chosen to decorate it. I always remember when I worked at Leeds, we had a really amazing collection of hand axes, like many museums have. There are many, many hand axes to be found in the world, but people would spend a lot of time polishing them, and that had no bearing on its use. It was to make it a beautiful thing, and to make it a, you know, kind of object of beauty like we choose to have in our houses or whatever today. And I think it's those points of connection when you're with particularly archaeological objects, I find that really strong. And you know, I'm really lucky. I get to hold these things in a way that our visitors can't necessarily, with my gloves on, obviously. But you know, I think that's one of the real privileges of working in museums, is I get to maybe try and carefully hold an object like somebody might have actually held it or used it in the past. And that, yeah, that is a massive privilege, I think, in my job.
Ruth, just lastly, a question to ask of you is, if someone was watching this conversation or listening into it, and they were interested perhaps in a career in heritage, what advice would you give to them?
Yeah, I think heritage is such a massive field, and there's so many opportunities and ways to get into it. And I think I'd really advise people to do their research, like all good historians, and kind of work out what they think would appeal to them. I think there's some really obvious ways into the sector. So, like working in a museum is obviously, it's really obvious that you'll be working with heritage there. But just thinking about those other places where heritage might crop up, or different ways of working with it as well. And I think thinking about the skills that studying history gives you, again, that are maybe less obvious or less obviously connected to working with history. So, you know, taking in loads of information and being able to distill it for a certain audience, and being able to kind of argue your case and propose a thesis, I think is a really great skill. I actually think, again, maybe this comes back to my people thing, but studying history, I think, teaches you a lot about empathy, and I think that's a really interesting skill to think about, thinking about careers and kind of where that might take you. But yeah, for heritage in particular, I think just researching all of the different opportunities that exist, and the ways into it. And something people quite often ask me, like, how to get jobs in museums, and like, it's important to be honest that it is quite difficult. It's a oversubscribed field, and there's a lot of competition. But I think thinking about what experience you have that makes you a kind of an attractive employee, and that's not necessarily just about experience of working in museums or heritage, but you know, you might work in a shop, and that means that you're really great at customer service, so you will be brilliant at talking to visitors. So maybe a learning role would be ideal for you. If you've worked in anything kind of sales based, you know, so much of working in heritage and museums is about our commercial arm as well. So I think, don't just think about those sorts of heritage skills or history skills, but think about everything else that you might do in your life, and the other kind of skills and competencies that gives you as well, and really sell those, I think.